Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Radhikacharya also does his Videsi Bhaktivedanta Samsara Prabhupada Ki Jai Namacharya Das Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sikahal Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Radhikadara Shri Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Govida Shama Kunda Radhika Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Sri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Navadip Dham Ki Jai Ganga Jamuna Tulsi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Ananda Gauri Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakti Vrinda Ki Jai Gop Premanandi All glories to some of the devotees, all glories to some of the devotees, all glories to some of the devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Guru, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vishnu Buddha Shrimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachadane Nirvashesha Shunyavadi Pashacharya Shatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Read from Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 9 chapter 17 verse 1. Shri Badarayane Ruvacha Ya Puru Rava Saputra Ayustasya Bhavan Sutta Naho Shakshata Ritascha Paraji Rabascha Viryavan Shri Badarayani Uvacha Sri Sukadev Goswami said, one who Pururavasa of Pururava Putra, son Ayu. His name was Ayu. Tasya, of him, Abhavan, there was Suta, sons Nahusha, Kshatravrida cha, and Kshatravrida, Raji, Rabba cha, also Viryavan, very powerful. Translation, Sukadeva Goswami said, from Puru Rava came a son named Ayu, whose very powerful sons were Nahusha, Kshatravrida, Raji, Rabba, and Anena. O Maharaj Parikshit, now hear about the dynasty of Kshatravrida. Kshatravrita's son was Suhotra, who had 3 sons named Kasya, Kusa, and Gritamada. From Gritamada came Naka, and from him came Saunaka, the great saint, the best of those conversant with the Rig Veda. The son of Kasya was Kasi, and his son was Rashtra, the father of Dirgatama. Dirgatama had a son named Dhanvantari, who was the inaugurator of the medical science and an incarnation of Lord Vasudeva, the enjoyer of the results of sacrifice. One who remembers the name of Dhanvantari can be released from all disease. The son of Dhanvantari was Ketuman, and his son was Bhimarata. The son of Bhimarata was Divodasa, and the son of Divodasa was Juman, also known as Pratardana. Juman was also known as Satrajit, Vatsa, Ritadvaja, and Kuvalayasva. From him was born Alaka and other sons. Alarka, the son of Juman, reigned over the earth for 66,000 years. My dear King Parikshit, no one other than him has reigned over the earth for so long as a young man. From Alarka came a son named Santati, and his son was Sunita. The son of Sunita was Nikitana, and the son of Nikitana was Dharmaketu, and the son of Dharmaketu was Satyaketu. O King Parikshit, from Satyaketu came a son named Dritaketu, and from Dritaketu came Sukumara, the emperor of the entire world. From Sukumara came a son named Vitihotra, and from Vitihotra Bharga, and from Bharga, Bhargabhumi. O Maharaj Parikshit, all these kings were descendants of Kasi, and they could also be called descendants of Kshatravrida. The son of Rabba was Rabasa, and from Rabasa came Gambhira, and from Gambhira came a son named Akriya. The son of Akriya was known as Brahmavit, O king. Now hear about the descendants of Anena. From Anena came a son named Sudha, and his son was Suchi. The son of Suchi was Dharma Sarati, also called Chitrakrit. From Chitrakrit was born a son named Shantaraj, a self-realized soul who performed all kinds of Vedic ritualistic ceremonies and therefore did not beget any progeny. The sons of Raji were 500, all very powerful. On the request of the demigods, Raji killed the demons and thus returned the kingdom of heaven to Lord Indra. But Indra, fearing such demons as Prahlad, returned the kingdom of heaven to Raji and surrendered himself at Raji's lotus feet. Upon Raji's death, Indra begged Raji's sons for the return of the heavenly planet. They did not return it, however, although they agreed to return Indra's shares in ritualistic ceremonies. Purport: Raji conquered the kingdom of heaven, and therefore when Indra, the heavenly king, begged Raji's sons to return it, they refused. Because they had not taken the heavenly kingdom from Indra, but had inherited it from their father, they considered it their paternal property. Why then should they return it to the demigods? Thereafter, Brihaspati, the spiritual master of the demigods, offered oblations in the fire so that the sons of Raji would fall down from moral principles. When they fell, Lord Indra killed them easily because of their degradation. Not a single one of them remained alive. From Kusa, the grandson of Kshatravrida, was born a son named Prati. The son of Prati was Sanjaya, and the son of Sanjaya was Jaya. From Jaya, Krita was born, and from Krita, King Haryabala. From Haryabala came a son named Sahadeva, and from Sahadeva came Hina. The son of Hina was Jayasena, and the son of Jayasena was Sankriti. The son of Sankriti was the powerful and expert fighter named Jaya. These kings were the members of the Kshatrivida dynasty. Now let me describe to you the dynasty of Nahusha. Thus end the Bhagavatam under purports of 9th canto, 17th chapter, Srimad Bhagavatam, titled The Dynasties of the Sons of Pururava. Nothing. Next chapter. Sukadeva Goswami said, O King Parikshit, as the embodied soul has 6 senses, King Nahusha had 6 sons named Yati, Yayati, Sangyati, Ayati, Viyati, and Kirti. When one enters the post of king or head of the government, one cannot understand the meaning of self-realization. Knowing this, Yati, the eldest son of Nahusha, did not accept the power to rule, although it was offered by his father. Purport: self-realization is the prime objective of human civilization. It is regarded seriously by those who are situated in the mode of goodness and have developed the Brahminical qualities. Kshatriyas are generally endowed with material qualities conducive to gaining material wealth and enjoying sense gratification. But those who are spiritually advanced are not interested in material opulence. Indeed, they accept only the bare necessities for a life of spiritual advancement and self-realization. It is specifically mentioned here that if one enters political life, especially in the modern day, one loses the chance for human perfection. Nonetheless, one can attain the highest perfection if one hears Srimad Bhagavatam. This hearing is described as Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Maharaj Parikshit was involved in politics, but because at the end of his life he heard Srimad Bhagavatam from Sukadeva Goswami, he attained perfection very easily. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has therefore suggested Stane Stita Shruti Guttam Tanu Avang Manobhiya Ye Prayaso Chitopi Asi Tais Trilokyam. Regardless of whether one is in the mode of passion, ignorance, or goodness, if one regularly hears Srimad Bhagavatam from the self-realized soul, one is freed from the bondage of material involvement. So, much of the 9th canto is involved with tracing dynasties. So the last chapter was simply that, tracing dynasties from Pururava. And now this is about the dynasty of Nahusha. And in relation to this, Yati seemed to be the eldest son, but he said, I don't want to rule the kingdom because it is not very spiritually conducive, or whatever. So, this, of course, is a general observation on Kshatriya life, kings, etc. Generally, the Brahmins are more dedicated to spiritual life. So when we talk about Dvija or twice born, usually it refers to the Brahmana, even though technically Kshatriyas and Vaishyas are also Dvijas. And when we talk about studying the Veda, we usually think of Brahmins studying the Veda, though even a Vaishya is qualified to study the Veda. So generally the Brahmins are the ones who take up spiritual life. And we see that they are entitled to go further than the others in terms of ashram, because the Brahmana can take sannyas and do extreme renunciation and dedicate himself completely to spiritual life, whereas the others never get to that stage. At the most, they can take a vanaprastha life. So therefore, in general, the Brahminical stage is more favorable for spiritual development, which may take 2 forms. One, of course, is the impersonal aspect of simply renunciation and realization of Atma. The other is, of course, dedication to the Supreme Lord as a Vaishnava. However, the Vaishnava status is a little special because you don't have to be completely renounced. To do the Atmagyan, that's the tendency. You renounce everything as part of your sadhana. So that aspect of spiritual life, yes, requires Brahminical status, sattva-gun, renunciation, etc. To practice as a Vaishnava does not require that. So here's Prabhupada quotes in the purport, Stane Stitaha. Being situated in your whatever place you are, wherever you are, in whatever varna, whatever ashram, you should dedicate your life to hearing Srimad Bhagavatam and worshiping the Supreme Lord with your body, mind, and words. It doesn't require that one goes through that sattva gun, being fixed in sattva gun and renouncing everything. And still, one can progress in spiritual life. And in fact, one can progress more than a jnani. So this is also the principle of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, where we say, that whether you are a householder, grihe tako, vane tako, or whether you're in the forest, renounce, it doesn't matter. In any case, you chant the holy name. So in general, the process of bhakti is very flexible, and it does not demand that you give up everything. So therefore, the kshatriya or the brahman or the vaishya or the sudra can perform this, and they can all get good results, very good results. Theoretically, of course, any human being, even outside that Varnashram system, can also get the same result. So that's bhakti in general. And then when we come to the holy name, that's even more flexible. Even apparatis can advance. So we have a very comprehensive system with bhakti that goes beyond this discrimination or say restriction based upon varnas and ashramas, etc. So that is the process of bhakti, and being a Vaishnava is a little bit different. So here the Yati is taking the conventional point of view. Oh, this ruling the kingdom is material, so therefore if I want to advance spiritually, I cannot do that. So that's a very general proposition, because we do see that exalted kings like Ambarish, and here Prabhupada mentions Parikshit Maharaj, the Pandavas, Dhruva Maharaj. They ruled the kingdom, but they were also very, very elevated devotees. So it does not mean that simply because of being a king or a kshatriya, one is barred from great spiritual advancement. No, that's not true. So therefore that restriction is more or less meant for jnana and yoga, but not for bhakti. But we will see that even Lord Chaitanya, in a sense, superficially followed that, and therefore he was very reluctant to meet King Prataparudra. He's a king. I'm a sannyasi. I cannot associate with a king. So of course, because he was a sannyasi, he was taking that role of saying that we should not associate with materialistic people, and kings are materialistic by nature. Therefore, we cannot associate with them. But then he understood the real nature of King Prataparudra. He was a great devotee of the Lord, and he had no problem with him at all. So there again we see that conventionally he acts in one way as a sannyasi in this Varnashram system, but then as a devotee, then he acts in another way. So therefore the rules of Varnashram are on one level, and the rules of the Vaishnava are a little bit different. And not all the rules equally apply. So in that sense also we see that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he did a little extraordinary thing, and that is he worshipped Haridas Thakur. Even though Haridas Thakur was not even in the Varnashram system, he was excluded completely. He was an outcast. But when he came, then he wanted to worship him and elevate him. Of course, Haridas Thakur was very reluctant to do so, but Lord Chaitanya's mood was that he was elevated as a Vaishnava, therefore we have to honor him more than others. So there again we see the Lord Chaitanya's conduct as a Vaishnava. On the other hand, we see him acting as a sannyasi. He would go out and beg. Where would he go? He'd go to Brahmin houses. Generally, he would do that. Go to the Brahmin house and take food there or whatever. But then he would break that also. So it's described in Mathura. He went to the house of Subhuti Rai, who was actually an outcast because he had been sprinkled with water by a Muslim. So that because of that, he'd been touched by Muslim water, therefore he was considered to be an outcast. But Lord Chaitanya went to his house and took the food anyway. So in this way, Lord Chaitanya sometimes would respect, or generally would respect the rules of sannyas or whatever, but then as a Vaishnava he would also overlook that in many cases. And we see that again described in Chaitanya Charitamrita when Haridas Thakur passed away. And then Lord Chaitanya carried him and touched him and carried him and personally did all the ceremonies for his passing away, etc. And then he personally went out and begged for food, and then they had a big feast honoring him. So Lord Chaitanya acted in both ways. It was Vaishnava and following the system as well. So therefore we have different rules within the Varnashram system, and then we have the rules of bhakti. So within the Varnashram system, then even there's distinction. So we see that in the Bhagavad Gita, where first of all Krishna presents the rules of karma yoga. So you have to act like this because that's the duty of a kshatriya. Therefore you have to fight because kshatriyas should not be anyway, dishonored, etc. So he gives those rules about fighting, etc. And on the other hand, then he presents the other argument. Actually, nobody's the material body. So you shouldn't grieve even if people die. That's a different argument. That's completely different from the kshatriya. That's a atma jnana argument. You're not the body, you're the soul. So that's jnana. So he gives that reason as the reason for not fighting. So that's a higher rule. Than a rule based upon varnas or whatever. So we do have, let's say, conflicts between the two systems sometime, that is between jnana and karma yoga. So which is superior? Ultimately, if one is qualified for jnana, then one must follow those rules rather than the lower rules. And then if one is a jnani, not only one distinguishes body and becomes detached from the material body, one should also renounce all of these other lower activities. So then in that sense, we shouldn't even be a kshatriya. And this is very confusing for Arjuna, because you're saying, be detached, you're not the body, and then you're saying, fight. So he's saying both things. You be a jnani, you also be a kshatriya. So that's a little bit confusing. So there is a little bit of conflict in the Varnashram system itself when we come to the level of jnana versus the level of karma yoga, which to follow. Ultimately, the lower rules are karma yoga, the higher rules are jnana. So therefore, ultimately, the rules of jnana prevail over those of karma, provided that you're qualified for jnana. If you're not qualified for jnana, then you do the rules of karma. That's the general rule. But higher than the rules of jnana are the rules of bhakti. So that's even superior. So these are quite different from both. So you may follow the rules of renunciation, or you may not follow the rules of renunciation. You can do either way. You can act as a kshatriya, or you can act as a jnani and renounce your whole family and kshatriya, whatever like that, and just go off to the fort. You can do either. It doesn't matter really. It just depends on one's own, what is favorable for yourself and your relation to Krishna. So this ultimately is a higher principle. So we have karma yoga principles acting according to your varna. We have the rules of jnana, which is based on renunciation of everything. And then we have the rules of bhakti, which doesn't really matter as long as you engage in the service of the Lord. So you can follow duties or not follow duties or whatever. So that is really expressed in the fact that devotees, of course, if they are attached to material things, to some degree, to that degree, they follow the Varnashram system. The more they become detached, the less obligated they are to follow. But then they may follow because of duty. That is setting an example for others, for that purpose only. Others will criticize if you don't follow. So that's a higher level. So what the lower level is a little bit of attachment. So we follow because we're attached to those rules, whatever. That's based a little bit on false identity. And then we're free from false identity, but we follow simply because to set an example. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, whatever the leader does, everybody else follows. So we do that. So in that sense, we see the Pandavas and Arjuna followed Kshatriya rules, not because they had to, simply to set an example for others as, Kshatriyas. Only for that purpose. That's higher. At that stage where one is completely detached, one can also give up all those rules again and completely renounce. Like Sukadev, not following any varna or ashram or even being a Brahmin or anything. That's a very different thing. Completely rejects the whole system. Of course, it's not so common, but it is there. So that's another alternative. But it's not that that person is superior to the person like Arjuna, who is a Kshatriya and doing his duty to set an example for others. They're spiritually the same, actually. But according to the situation, one could renounce everything, and that person is equally, spiritually elevated. So one can go either way. So this is the position in devotion. One could be completely renounced, or one could be performing activities in the Varnashram system without attachment. Same. So in the Varnashram system, one would be a Brahman, a Kshatriya, or a Vaishya, or a Sudra. Then the other completely different position is no Varna, no ashram at all. So you don't renounce anything because you never had anything. And then we have people like Haridas Thakur. So they didn't have any Varna ashram. They're completely beyond anyway. So they just followed this form of bhakti. And that goes for most of the people in the modern world anyway. They can't really identify with their Varna or ashram or whatever. And of course all the other countries in the world the same. So that's another situation, is they're completely beyond the Varnashram system. So we get a variety of people who are qualified for bhakti. And whatever the qualification is, faith. And based on that, they begin. And it doesn't matter what their situation is. What varna, what ashrama, or no varna, no ashrama, doesn't really matter. And then when they do practice, again, they can either give up or keep, depending on their situation. So very, very flexible system. So that is particularly apt for Kali Yuga, where the whole Varnashram system is more or less withered away, and it's very difficult to practice even or follow properly. So therefore, bhakti takes very, very great prominence in these ages. So anyway, the conventional thing, of course, is that kings generally are materialistic or whatever, but as I said, king here does not mean a normal king, because this is the line from Manu. So they're very special people. So these kings are empowered by Supreme Lord. They are vibhutis of the Lord, like devatas. So they have a special power by which they can rule and not get contaminated. So we see in the very beginning of the third canto there, Priyavrata was very reluctant to rule the kingdom also. So I got contaminated, and then finally Brahma had to come and order him to take up the kingdom. So he ruled and nothing happened, and he was a great devotee of the Lord also. But perception is, of course, that it is contaminating. But because the Manus and their descendants are empowered in general, they don't get really affected so much by this, the kingly activities and whatever. They maintain their spiritual status.
Other system. So people may get confused. Like sometimes they want to take one part of Mahaprabhu's instructions, being conventional. The other thing is purely bhakti. We said Mahaprabhu didn't eat in non-Brahmin's house. but there was an exception.
Yeah.
So now in India, there are certain sections from the Gaudiya. Mahaprabhu only took prasadam in Vaishnava's house. Brahmins were born in Brahmana family.
Well, that's only sannyasi,
Sannyasi as a sannyasi.
But there weren't any sannyasis in the Gaudiya Sampradaya, so that's not a rule to follow until Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur came, so it's not really an issue, I don't think, as far as our Sampradaya is concerned. Other Sampradayas, yes, they will probably only eat in Brahmana families, like in the Sri Sampradaya Madhava. Definitely they're not going to eat only in Brahmin families, and only in their Sampradaya. They won't even eat in probably a Shankar Brahmin family, probably.
Madhvas are very strict.
Yeah, they're very strict. They only eat within their own community, even.
Sometimes people criticize Gaudiyas that we are so flexible. They don't follow any rules and regulations. They don't follow any Varnashrama system. They simply chant. Maybe they don't know exactly what is the inner feelings of the devotees.
Well, that of course is the general tendency in the Gaudiya Sampradaya, where, Lord Chaitanya, with talking with Ramananda, then he rejects everything, and when he's talking to the Madhvas again, he says this is all external, Varnashram system, etc. So in that sense, we get this idea that the Varnas and ashrams are not so important. But we also see that he did follow, as a sannyasi, he followed his dharma there quite strictly. So we get the two sides there, according to the situation. So, and again, his other people, they weren't sannyasis, they were grihastas mainly, so they followed the system as much as possible at that time. But the idea is that that's not the important thing to follow. The important thing is the bhakti aspect, and if one neglects that, then the other part doesn't make any sense at all. And if you do the bhakti, you can do the other and follow as much as possible. But it takes secondary importance, that's all.
Sometimes we find that devotees, we criticize the other so-called Brahmins left and right. Oh, they're all wearing the Brahmin thread, they're not doing anything. Sometimes we criticize them, and they also criticize.
Well, yeah, of course, the criticism go both ways. Brahmins in Kali Yuga, are they really qualified as Brahmins because they don't even study the Vedas or whatever? Most of them don't study the Vedas, I think, as children. They don't go to the Gurukul. The maximum Veda they do is they chant the Gayatri Mantra. Hopefully they will chant every day, but maybe that they don't do either. So that's about the extent of the Vedas that most Brahmanas have. There's very few Brahmanas, and probably only in maybe 1% or less than 0.1% maybe of those born in Brahmin families in modern India actually study the Vedas. Maybe less than that even, 0.01% maybe, I'm not sure. And generally it's going to be families who are already archikas in the temples in South India especially, and only those ones are the ones that are going to take up studies. And even then, probably one person in the family will do it, the others will go out and get jobs. So, I mean, it's very, very rare that we're going to get that. So nobody can really criticize, because even they are not following properly. Yeah? And if they have 4 children, maybe one, if they're lucky, will dedicate himself to following the Vedas. Out of those families, the rare families that do so, maybe one of the whole family will do that. So they can't really criticize.
They also happen in the Modi's family also.
What's that?
Study software.
Yeah. No, but anyway, see, that's not, we're not criticizing that. But if you are a Brahmana and you are supposed to be a Brahmana and you're proud of your Brahmana status, then you should actually follow that properly. As a Vaishnava, we're not saying one thing or other, because that's whatever you do as a job is a job. We're not saying there's a restriction one way or the other, but you should actually follow principles and of bhakti. So that's what we look at, whether you're following the principles of bhakti properly.
Maharaj, you mentioned about for a higher rule, we give up the lower rule from karma yoga to jnana yoga.
Where there's a conflict.
Sorry, Maharaj?
Where there's a conflict of obligations,
But they have to be qualified to get to the thing. But in common, what we see is that not many people are qualified, even for that matter, to do karma yoga properly. So what to speak of jnana yoga or bhakti yoga, right? So in that context, doesn't it become important that at least the Varnashrama is established, because most of the people are in that platform, and people have to at least be in the Varnashrama system of the rule to live that fundamental thing. So how do we see that, they can take up to bhakti, because they might not be qualified. Obviously, bhakti does not have any.
Yeah, so the only qualification for bhakti is faith. So it doesn't matter whether you're fixed in as a Vaishya or a Kshatriya or a Sudra or a Brahmana or as a Jnani. It doesn't really matter. So if we want to establish that, we spend all of our time spending 5,000 years trying to establish a Varnashrama system, then we do the bhakti. That's pretty risky because it may not succeed anyway. You may not succeed in establishing, forcing everybody into a Varna and following those things. Then you have to have a king, and that doesn't work either. We can't have monarchies in the modern day. People aren't going to go for it. It's very difficult to really enforce varnas as such. Ashramas, yes, to some extent, is a little flexible. We can do to some extent, but even then it is very difficult, probably because everybody has to get jobs and everything like that, so you can't even be a brahmachari in the modern world. So very, very difficult to do that. So that is why bhakti is recommended as the flexible process for advancement, because this is very, very difficult to institute it even and establish basics in terms of varnashram. Probably the only aspect of varnashram that you can do is not in terms of varna and ashram, but the very basic principles of all the varnas and ashramas, the moral qualities and the principles of sin and not sin, etc. Have people follow those. That's about all you can do, I think. That's the only standard we can set, not really get into the varnas and who is qualified for what according to their varna, etc.
So,
huh? Yeah.
Way to follow in Kali Yuga. We find ISKCON, many places, there are many groups of devotees are trying to set up varnashram, farming, agriculture. Is it because they want to just
Prabhupada said, because Prabhupada gave an order to establish it, but then what does it mean to establish that varnashram? What does it mean actually? And that's a little bit of a controversial question. So for some it means farm communities. That's technically not varnashram, it's only one varna, a Vaishya, but then nobody wants to be a Vaishya actually. Very few people want to be Vaishyas and sit and plow the fields every day and go and milk the cows every day. If you want to do that, fine, but then most devotees would rather read Srimad Bhagavatam and do kirtan. So it's like it's a little bit counterproductive to do that type of thing, make a self-sufficient community and you work all your life doing that, and then nobody wants to join because they'd rather just do bhakti. So, what does it really mean? So maybe it doesn't mean that. Maybe it means simply establish some basic principles of the Varnashram system for everybody to follow, 4 regulator principles, Jan Hare Krishna, that's it.
We should not call this as Varnashram. Give some other name. We can call it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, the GBC doesn't want to call it Varnashram because this is a very negative concept among many people in the Western world. That means caste system. Discrimination, and of course that in India even it has the wrong connotations that discrimination according to caste or whatever like that, so that's why they don't want to use that word.
Then initiation, we tell Brahmin initiation, even that creates a little different.
Well, that's also a misnomer actually. It's not, of course Prabhupada used it, but actually in the Gaudiya Math they don't use that term. They just call it Diksha. And they don't call the first one initiation at all, but we call it first and second initiation, so we get a little confused there and call it Brahman initiation, etc. But anyway, it's... Yeah, well technically it's not any of them because it's not specific. It's just a Dvija initiation. It could be Vaishya, Kshatriya, or Brahman, technically, because you're getting at least the men are getting a Brahman thread, and you're getting the Gayatri mantra, the Vedic Gayatri mantra, but it's not specific to any of them, so it's not necessarily. But the reason that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati introduced that is simply to show that the Vaishnava is superior to the Brahmana, not that he's becoming a Brahmana. He is superior to the Brahmana by being an initiated Vaishnava. So therefore he can do any work that a Brahmana could do in society, like sacrifices, temple worship, etc. That's all. So the goal of second initiation is to be a Vaishnava, not to be a Brahmana. But as a Vaishnava, he is also qualified as a Brahmana. That's the idea. So we're not trying to become Brahmanas.
By saying that we are establishing a Vaishnava community. Maybe in ISKCON, we are trying to lose the concept of any other service being done. People are interested only in reading and doing kirtan. Then who will do the other services?
No. Vaishnava community, of course, means that we're going to have all sorts of people there, and they need some financial support. So you can do two things. The society can support everybody. That's not practical. Everybody gets the free, everything. And this doesn't work that way. Our finances don't work that way. So therefore, people have to find their own financial support. That means they will have to work. So in a community there, they have to work somewhere. Either the society provides the jobs, our society provides the jobs, or they get a job outside and they contribute as much as they can to the movement. Either way, that's what we mean by the community. The other way of doing it is you set up a separate, isolated community, and you put everybody in the community outside. Then you have to make some jobs for those people in there, and that becomes a difficult job also. Either you have to train people up, or because there's people are already trained for different jobs and you have to put them into other jobs, so that becomes a little bit difficult also. If you want to have a self-sufficient community where some people are doing agriculture, some are doing menial work, some are doing Vaishya work, and some are doing Brahminical work and Kshatriya work, etc., then you have to retrain people, and that's a big endeavor also. And we're not even experienced at doing that, so it's also very, very difficult to do that. There's experiments in the world, a few. Most of them have failed. There's a few that are going on still, but most of them have not really succeeded too well in doing that. At most, they struggle to maintain the Vaishya activities. So, as such, that's why we just generally keep that support for the family separate, and just we give the instructions on bhakti.
The argument decided is that if I'm working outside the families and getting attached to materialistic things, better we have one farm system and 10 cows and use the milk for the temple worship. In that case, it is better.
Well, yes, that's definitely a better situation. We should have our own cows and our own agriculture, etc. But to set that up is an endeavor that you have to, really endeavor to do properly. And if you're not expert at doing it, you'll fail. So many temples try it, but not many have really succeeded in that endeavor. Even in Mayapur, for instance, they got 3,000 devotees there, but still, can they do it? Most of the thing they're buying their food from outside and bringing it in, whatever like that. So it's a big endeavor.
Auroville is doing this in Pondicherry. They have a community.
Huh?
Auroville. They have some type of. They have one community.
Mainly industries. They don't do farming.
Even that is collapsed completely there.
Oh, okay.
There's no such thing, I remember, about 15 years ago, Bhakti Purushottam Maharaj came down to study the whole Auroville thing as to how they build the communities.
Yeah.
At that time, they were talking about a lot of self-sufficient communities and things like that.
Yeah.
That whole system is completely collapsed now. There's nothing like that exists. People just, kind of survival kind of thing, Even the industries that they set up, none of them are functional. They had this Auro computers, Auro this, everything Auro, but nothing really exists today.
Oh, okay.
Practically collapsed.
So everyone is on their own, more or less.
They're just maintaining themselves. Whoever has captured some land there, they're just farming those lands and maintaining themselves. That's more what they do. Maharaj, in the context about Varnashrama or whatever, the farm communities that we are doing, which is primarily Vaishya work, but maybe we are not even that nature. We don't even have that nature of Vaishya, but we tend to, Prabhupada said we have to do farm communities. So let's get into farm communities and do farm communities. But we don't have the nature of even a Vaishya to know, first of all, what to do and how to do and things like that. So isn't that kind of an artificial way of trying to impose ourselves into a particular Varna? Probably we might not be successful at all, like what we're seeing today.
That's my point. So if you're going to make a community, you take people who are already Vaishyas and make them into devotees. In other words, what you do is you get some farmers and make them into devotees. Then you automatically got a Vaishya community, rather than us trying to be Vaishyas when we're not. It's easier that way.
Even when we take up some Vaishyas and train them, after some time they tend to become the Vaishnavas themselves and say that they want to advance and keep studying and making it and their own, Vaishyas characters.
Well, as far as if they get older, it's natural. People who retire, they should do that. Even if they're Vaishyas, they should retire, take vanaprastha or whatever, do more spiritual things like that. But if they got a family, then they should at least maintain their family until that time. And to do that, then they should do their work.
Spiritual master is the one who is interested in the spiritual well-being of all the living entities. Here in this chapter we see Brihaspati working against Brihaspati, the demigod's priest, demigod's spiritual master is working against those Raji's 500 sons.
Working against?
Raji's 500 sons. He was not wishing well for the other side. He was actually countering and saying that they should not be well like that.
So that they fall from the moral principles. He is doing some oblations so that they fall from the moral principles.
This last point here where they all fell down and there was no descendants because they fell into sinful activities. So what's the point?
So, I mean, how can a spiritual master work against somebody falling from the moral principles? Why is he called a spiritual master?
Well, the whole point was that the sons took away the kingdom of, or the father had the kingdom, gave it to the sons wouldn't give it back to Indra. They refused to give back Indra's kingdom.
Yeah, but he's going to kill all the 500. He took the shelter of the father, but he's killing the sons, 500 sons, because they are not cooperating.
Yeah, so how does Indra supposed to get his kingdom back? Somehow it has to go back to Indra because that's Indra's in Svargaloka, he has his kingdom. So the sons of should not claim that kingdom as theirs, even though their father gave it to them, so to speak, like that.
So that is right, Maharaj, for Brihaspati?
Right or wrong, it just happened. I don't know.
This sort of philosophy is in Mahabharata also.
Yeah.
Have one more question.
Bhanu gets the kingdom and after
Yeah.
But it's also said that Indra was fearing demons such as Prahlad. Indra was fearing demons such as Prahlad. What does it mean, Maharaj?
Yeah, I don't know what it means there, whether Prahlad was existing at that time or whatever, or maybe Prahlad's descendants or something, because Prahlad was probably down on Sutala Loka at that time. I don't know. Yeah, it's a demon family, obviously.
By reading such incidences from the Vedas and Puranas, the modern people, already they are against God, atheist. So they'll get more confirmed these Shastras are full of this type of killing others or wanting for greed and envy.
Yeah, that's because this is the material world.
So they may go away from the Lord.
And in the material world, nothing is perfect. So we find some of the kings are very good, some of them are medium, some are not so good also. Of course, in the Manu's line, most of them are good. But then we find very extreme examples of evil, like King Vena. He was so bad that they had to assassinate him. And he was coming in Manu's line also. But then now we get the opposite. We get Prithu coming in the same line right after that. So it's the material world, that's all. And if you look at Mahabharata, you'll see the same thing. But if you look at the newspapers, you see much worse things every day.
One person
so I
asking,
shouldn't think the material world is very good.
We always read in the newspapers and movies and televisions all about this. Why Bhagavatam should contain all this type of low type of mentality?
Well,
and we can't even do this.
Most of it's not. You'll see that most of this is in the 9th canto. You'll find most of this, which is when we're coming into Kali Yuga. Basically, we're approaching Kali Yuga now, and we're getting worse and worse as we go on. And when it comes to the later dynasties, then it's really bad. This one overthrows that one and assassinates this one, and the son of this one gets jealous and he kills this one. It gets really disgusting as it goes on further. But we'll say even in previous times, and this is much before still material world. So therefore, we'll have persons not perfect; they have imperfections.
Maharaj, in case of these dynasties, they have been empowered directly by Lord. The kings who are in this dynasty, they are directly empowered by Lord, right? So in that situation, how do we understand that somehow or other they they are acting like this, like, cheating propensity or whatever. So how do we understand?
What I said is a general thing, like King Vena was in the line, but he was evil, so they had to assassinate him, etc. So generally the empowered, but they have their free will, so some of them make mistakes, some are better than others, etc. That's all.
Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.